Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome into the Takeup. I'm happy to have you here for this Education Friday. We're going to have a bit of a short episode today as I have an immediate place I have to run to. You guys know my life is pretty hectic lately, and that is not changing today. We are most certainly going to have a kind of a short day today, but hopefully one that is worthwhile as we're going to cover some things that I think are often overlooked in the world of embroidery and digitizing, and that is preparation and pre-flight. So I know you guys may have been aware of what a pre-flight checklist is when folks are going to be pilots. When they're going to fly a plane, they have to go through a checklist of all these things that have to be in line before they take off. And I think the same thing is very important for production in embroidery and also for digitizing and for file preparation. And I think lots of people ignore this pre flight step and end up in all sorts of trouble when they don't have exactly what they expect out of their files, especially if they are going old school sneaker net. What I mean by that is transferring files by walking them over to a machine or to a production department, something that is still, quite frankly, frequently done in the embroidery world, even with increasing levels of automation and networking. There's lots of folks who grab a thumb drive and run it over to a machine. And it's even more important then that we are careful with our files and prep them and understand what we're getting into before we go any further. Also, it stops all sorts of difficulties and problems you may have in your actual initial stitch out, gets gross errors out of the way, stops you from probably stops you from running into the hoop depending on how you got things set up, but it does absolutely help you with making sure you have exactly what you expect when you go to the machine. And I'm also going to talk a little bit more broadly about this pre-flight and prep concept as far as we go through the rest of embroidery here. So it's not going to be just about digitizing and file prep, but the concept of preparation and pre-flight really goes for any stage in the embroidery process. I would say even when we're going to start digitizing, we can talk about things like art preparation and say, why don't we have that in a row? Why don't we have a pre-flight stage for that? Before we start digitizing, do we have all of the proper conditions met? And in the case of digitizing commercially, what this really means for me is, have I gotten the sign off on any particular changes that might have to happen on color selections, on sizing, what other questions you might have, whatever you might have to ask a customer before we get to the point of digitizing. Because as we all know who have digitized embroidery files, it is a lot easier to change vector graphics or even raster graphics, to rearrange things, to handle color changes, to resequence, to cut, especially cut elements out of other elements or stack them differently before we digitize, where we literally leave out in the digitizing process elements that might be overlapped. That's something that we just really need to handle in the art preparation stage. So if we don't do that kind of same pre-flight check, which is saying, hey, at the end of all of the art preparation, have I done the initial art checkup? Have I gotten the approval process to the stage it needs to be to go to embroidery, to go to the digitizing process? And if we have not, then we should stop and make sure we've checked off all our boxes. So, like I said, this is all over the board. This concept of making sure we are prepared to do the work we intend to do, that stuff is all just part and parcel of what we need to do in our embroidery lives. And I think that's something that doesn't always get talked about. And especially in the fact that as we deal with file preparation, there are some particular snags in the fact that embroidery files are composed of both the working file, the file that you work on in your digitizing software, and the output stitch file. And in between those two, processes can happen that can be detrimental to the final file if we are not particularly careful with what happens in between, if we don't check on what that is that we are supposed to be outputting and making sure that we get the output that we expect, right? So these are all things that need to be thought of, that need to be dealt with, and certainly should be part of our calculus in this process. And in any case, I wanted to make sure that you guys were kind of aware of where we were headed with this, why I wanted to go where we were going, and then discuss the kinds of things we should be looking at for these pre-flights, for these checkups, and honestly, just kind of cover that shortly as a topic to get us on the way and let you know the kinds of things you might run into as we get into those checkups. But as you guys know, when I am live, I like to say hi to the folks who are here. If you are on the replay squad, we love you for being here, but most certainly you can fast forward through this if you don't want to hear the chatter. Otherwise, I like to say hello to the folks who are here live. If you have things you want to discuss about previewing files, about what you do to prepare your embroidery department for production queuing, how you get your machine areas ready, by all means share those. But let's go ahead and talk to the folks who are here. First, we have Cindy saying, good freezing afternoon from Odessa, Texas. Hopefully you're doing all right out there. We were pretty cold and not normal weather out here in Albuquerque, New Mexico as well. And we'll find out what that means for me where I'm moving next. Got lots of stuff going on. I see everybody talking about their weather. Debbie saying hello from New York, 70 degrees and apparently lovely. So that's good to hear about. We have Doug coming in from partly cloudy Los Angeles. Apparently it's the weather report today, but that works for me. B is coming in saying good morning from South Australia. Hi, B. Happy to have you in as well. We've got Barb coming in from North Central Minnesota who says, hi, Eric. Well, hi, Barb. Happy to have you in. Love to see everybody in here. We've got everybody talking to each other, which community is a big thing for me. So always glad to see that. Got Frank from out in the UK, always an awesome promoter and sharer of all things embroidery knowledge. So if you are not following Frank wherever he is, absolutely go follow what he does because he's always sharing and always helping and building up the community. So love that. We've got Scott in from Sunrise Tactical Gear saying, happy Friday, everyone. Happy Friday, Scott. Happy to see you here as well. Lots of everybody talking to each other. So I will try not to cover all of those. Got Gail from Kingsbury saying hello to everybody. Hello. Happy to have you guys in too. And we've got everybody chatting. Love it. Love to see it. Crystal's in saying hi from Minnesota. Bonnie saying, catching you live today from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Happy to have you here as well, Bonnie. Heidi says, hi. Hi to you too, Heidi. We have Gail coming in from Under the Needle Embroidery in Alberta, Canada. So thank you very much for our neighbors to the north. Thank you for being here. And Diane coming in from Connecticut. So hi, all. Hi, Diane. And we have Heidi saying, hello, Eric. Well, hi. I think I said hi to you probably twice under 2 accounts, but I'll take it. Thanks for the extra viewer counts. In any case, let's get on to the actual topic of the day, folks. So preparation and pre-flight. I'll probably stumble on that one a couple more times, but let's talk about it. So what is the big deal with preparation and pre-flight? Why do I care about this stuff so much? Partially because I don't like wasted time. I am a production embroiderer. I'm somebody who worked on lots of big machines over the time that I've worked and certainly digitized for other people who are making mass production happen overseas and here, believe it or not. And in the case that you are working for that kind of production, you need to really manage your efficiency. And part of managing that efficiency is knowing exactly what you're going to get out of your machines, out of your embroidery software, whenever you put something out. You know what you're going to get, you know what you're providing, and part of that is doing the pre-flight check whenever you finish up your part of a design function. Now, the thing is, I was a digitizer, so certainly a lot of what I did was about that, was about getting things prepared and making sure that I could provide a production department with a complete set of information, including a design that is made to do what it is supposed to do. It does not have any extraneous stitches, extraneous thread breaks, problems, whatsoever. But truthfully, a lot of what we were looking for were things that were improperly placed, improperly sequenced, things of that nature. That really makes a difference to what someone's going to get and if they get what they expect. Also, like I said, because I did a lot of file preparation, I know very intimately that when you export a machine file, so we're talking about our stitch file, not the work file, the one that has the vector-like shapes in it that you see when you're digitizing, but the machine file, the stitch file, once you output that file, there are processes that can happen depending on your embroidery software and the settings that you have in your particular utilities that will filter out certain kinds of stitches or will do any other manner of operations on that file when it goes out to the final stitch file format. Not to mention weirdness about certain formats that can cause problems with your final stitch out. Because that's something that happens to you folks, you need to make sure that you're actually checking your files. So part of that preparation pre-flight for me is that kind of work is checking your files. So I am going to talk about that a little more extensively, but we're going to talk about all of it. The thing I am going to bring up though first is that I posted this show today and got a lovely little comment from um, a screen printing icon, right? Somebody who knows about production in a way that most of us will never know. Greg Kitson. So I'm going to bring that up because I think it's lovely when I get comments from some of these folks. So unless I don't share my screen in time, let's go ahead and share my screen again. Greg Kitson actually came in with a comment that I thought was really wonderful, and I liked the comment that he made and the terminology he used here. So, Greg Kitson says, pre-flight checklists are essential for CPR in your shop. So, I love this. Consistency, predictability, and repeatability. Absolutely essential for training new staff and retaining key staff members. If anybody in your workflow says, I do it my way, watch out. And so I told him, hey, that's an awesome way to put it, sir. And I was going to share that with you attendees. And honestly, here I am making that true. So I did want to share that with you and say, yeah, I love that terminology that he used. And I think it's something very useful for us here. So CPR, it's not about saving ourselves, though. Yes, I'm all about averting embroidery disasters. But this is something that you want out of embroidery shops. And certainly, even if you are someone who is making embroidery for yourself, either as a solopreneur, especially honestly as a solopreneur, because your time is especially valuable, or as someone who's making a craft piece for yourself, even if you're just doing this for craft, if you are doing this for art, this is still something you want to strive for the technical side of your embroidery. Consistency, predictability, and repeatability. What does this mean? We do the process the same way every time. Predictability, we know how it will turn out based on our input. The output is always going to be the same. Repeatability, when we change things, when we come back to this same file, when we come back to this same process, the next time we do it, it's going to be the same time as the last time we did it. It's going to be the same outcome as the last time we executed on the same file with the same materials in the same fashion. So if we have consistency of the method in which we work, then we will get from that predictable results and repeatable results. Predictable, we know what we're expecting and we're going to get it. Repeatable, when we do this again, the results will be the same. So CPR, that's really awesome. So I have to thank Greg Kitson again. It's something that's going to become part of my vocabulary, certainly coming from here out. But it certainly kind of encapsulates what I always talk about, which is that preparation and pre-flight is so that you know that each stage of the game is complete. Each stage of this process is complete. And especially in the production world, when you aren't a solopreneur, when you're handing off to another department, you are handing off a complete package of what is needed for the next department, and there will be no surprises for them, and then no recursions, meaning you're not going to have somebody come back to you, no reversal on the chain of information to say, hey, what's this? Why does this work wrong? Let's do edits on this, especially for things that are grossly visible and easy to find. So consistent work, consistency, predictability, repeatability, as we said earlier, CPR is really great. But I think a lot of what we need to do to make sure we're consistent is to prepare ourselves, to prepare our area, to prepare our files correctly, to prepare our art and know what's going on there. These things are all important. So, like I said, preparation and pre-flight lets us handle that. So preparation meaning what do we do to get ready for each process, and pre-flight meaning before we hit the button, before we send the email, before we ship the file, before we stitch, or before we pack the box and stick that box on a truck and out to the person who's going to open it with our products, what are we doing? What checklists are we looking over? That's kind of what we're handling today. So we have a couple of different things that are going to make sense of that. But like I said, we'll go over the individual places as we work on this stuff. We have a couple more people saying hi, so I'm going to jump in and say hi to Missy Cat from Indianapolis. Glad to see you here. Lisa Shaw, a fellow educator and also someone who very well knows about preparation, says, greetings from Jacksonville. What a great comment. Yeah, Greg really hit it out of the park today. He's doing me a great favor since I love to have that in my content as well. And Cindy says, and I fully agree with this one, I always do a sew out of all my designs. I get in a hurry and I forget I should use the Stitch Simulator to watch sew out first. I usually don't have any issues with my digitizer, thankfully. Yeah, I mean, the sew out can be the stage at which you do this stuff, but a lot of us, that is a lot of time and effort spent on the sew out. So especially if you're digitizing yourself, or if you've had to come back and forth to a project repeatedly, I really do recommend, whenever possible, to preview in the slow replay function, whatever that may be, the film strip function in your particular software, to see what is going on in your file before you go. And I'm actually going to run you through that in a moment here. But like I said, the different stages all have this process involved, right? The other thing I'm also going to do, I've actually written about this before. I've got a very old blog post, but one that still has some life left in it that I'm going to show you guys. So if you are wanting to read more about kind of mise en place, so the preparation, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, so getting your areas ready, also focus and getting yourself ready to work. Here's an article that we have here that's hosted on LinkedIn, which is fine. I think it's still a good article, and you can get to that still today. If you want to check this article out, preparation, focus, and presence, mise en place. We're going to talk about that term mise en place in a minute here. It's something that comes from the world of cooking, but I like to kind of bring that into the world of embroidery and production as well. We'll talk about that. And I'm just going to make sure you guys know I've actually talked about this before to a degree. So this is another one where if you want to see more of this, there is a piece that I did about preparation really in the embroidery department almost entirely. I'm going to talk a little bit more about file prep today, but this is another video you can watch. If you're here and you haven't been here before, you didn't watch all the way back at episode 42, go ahead and grab that link in the comments as well when you are done with this today, and you'll be able to go ahead and watch another video or listen to another video while you work about preparation and mise en place. So it'll be a little bit of the same stuff we're covering today, but today I really wanted to hit a little harder on that kind of preparation, on things that we talked about just a moment ago, but also hit the file preparation part of that a little harder. Because usually when I talk about mise en place, when I talk about preparation, I'm talking about the machine part of the preparation for doing embroidery and doing production. So in that case, mise en place, just to kind of make this clear, it's in my article here, but it really is something that's it's a French word that's usually used for chefs, talking about how they keep the tools in their area, how they work clean, how they have all of their materials close to them where they need them to be. Mise en place kind of meaning putting things in place. And when I talk about that in the world of embroidery, I'm usually talking about the production environment. The one thing that drives me crazy in a production environment for embroidery is watching people run back and forth. You'll be in a multi-machine shop, and I'm going to show you kind of what I'm talking about here in a moment, something that you'll see in some of my other articles on this particular topic. You'll see people in a multi-machine shop like this little portion of the shop that I worked in, but you will have people running all over the place because they only have one good screwdriver that's the right size and that everybody loves for changing needles. Or you'll see people who are missing the lubrication they need for their machine, or they need some spray tack, some embroidery specific spray tack to work on an applique piece of some kind, or something else that needs to be dealt with. Or maybe they're doing a really cantankerous piece of material that's very stretchy and soft, and they need to tack that down, and they need some spray tack material. So they are going to look for spray adhesive, and they're running all over the place looking for that. Or even in the world of information, back in the day when everything was much more paper based, where fewer people carried tablets around their shops, and honestly, there's still lots of shops that do this. People were running back and forth to one printer. In the case of something like the shop that I worked at, where we had multiple buildings, literally running back and forth to a printer in another building in the compound in order to get production sheets that would show them all the information they needed to do their work. I find that to be tremendously harmful to any kind of ability to keep your shop running cleanly. And the concept of mise en place in this case, and you can kind of see it in this shop picture that I'm showing you here, is that whatever you need should really be at arm's length. And this is a concept that's really easy to talk about when we're saying, here's this machine that we're working at. Right behind this machine, we have the machine's toolbox. We have the lubricants we need. We have a dust can ready to rock if we just need to dust an area and clean it quickly. If you can see the pegboard that's behind it, we have the most used hoops that are in this area. I'll admit that in this particular shot, you're not seeing the hooping jigs. They're around the side of these tables, but they are attached to the tables that are right behind it, and some folks still hoop flat. I know I did a lot of flat hooping back in my day, and this is a picture from many years ago at this point. But everything you need, you could pretty much reach and grab. And if you're doing it in this kind of mise en place way that the French cooking term refers to, it also means that you can pretty much blindfold yourself, stick your arm out, and put your hand on the tools you need the most. The stuff you need to use is within reach. And before you start a job, kind of more to the point, before you start a particular job, you arrange that job, you have all the materials for that particular job at hand before you start. You don't get the stuff, you're going to load the file, then go get the materials, then go get the right stabilizer, then go get the topper you need, then go find the threads that you need. You go grab everything, gang it all together, put it where it needs to be, have your production scale out there where you need it. So all of your production is lined up according to the machine that's going to go on in sequence. And then it's time to do production, and everything is at hand so that when it's time for pushing buttons, we have complete production information for each job ready to rock. We know where the files are, and they are either preloaded or they're able to be pulled on this network if that's how you're working, or if you're doing SneakerNet, you've got your thumb drive loaded with the files. You have all of the threads ready to either thread up, or you're already threaded up, obviously, if you're about to push the button. You have all of the garments ready, and they are separated by size. If you have to do things like size-based naming or numbering, where we know that things are going on particular sizes, information sheets are in front of you, or the tablet is in front of you with whatever shop information you have, and you are not pushing the button until you have that and all of the approvals squared away. Mise en place means I can lay my hand on the screwdriver I need if I need to change a needle immediately. Each one of these machines has its own toolkit so that we're not running around sharing. Nobody is looking for the good scissor. There are enough good scissors because they don't cost enough not to have one at every station. We all need a scissor for things. We all need trimmers that are sharp and ready to rock, frankly, a couple pair, because you never know when you drop a pair of trimmers and break the tip off and you don't want to stop trimming because of that. You have them sitting there waiting for you if everybody's trimming at their stations, which is often happens with a multi-head production like this. Everything you need is at hand, prepared, and looked over. And before you hit the button, even after everything's prepped, you take that last moment to do the pre-flight check. And this is where it's not covered under mise en place. This is what's covered in the pre-flight check, right? So if we go to that the pre-flight check, it's past the preparation. Right before we hit the button, we look back over and say, all right, I am on this garment. Sequence of colors is this, and I have it loaded in the machine properly if it's not something that loads automatically like some do these days through transfer files. I have thread loaded. All my heads are on and set how they should be. I am on the proper garments, on the proper sizes. I know what's going on with the rest of this file before I hit the button. And if this is something that I haven't run before, well, then we have already decided to do our stitch out, and our stitch out's approved. Approvals are in order. Everything is a known quantity before we hit the button on multi-head production. And the pre-flight check is to say, yes, I have all this. Everything's approved. We are on the right garments. We are in the right location. We do have the colors in the right sequence. They are the correct colors. And now we're ready to produce. Now, I know it sounds onerous. It sounds like a lot of work to do, but the truth of the matter is this becomes second nature, and it really doesn't take more time in preparation, especially if you consider this concept of starting to get little bits and pieces of all these different jobs ready and running back and forth, constantly looking for something else, having to deal with these switching costs, the cost of switching between two things or two tasks. Far better to have everything done and then do the last pre-flight check. Because at any time you could stop and say, you know what? I don't have a signature from the customer. I don't have an email or a text or an indication in my job management software that says they have ever seen the final produce of the stitch out once we got that done. I don't have approval. I'm not pushing the button. It's a lot better than running, 12 or or more garments with the wrong stuff, especially depending on the garments that you're running. Now, even if you're doing this for yourself, I still think stopping and looking things over, especially if you've had a hectic time of getting prepared, is always worth the moments that it takes. This is also where you might notice, like, hey, I've got something hooped where the tail of my shirt is up underneath the hoop and the cylinder arm, and I'm about to stitch the garment to itself. One last breath. Stopping for a beat and checking, even if it is not a formal pre-flight check, is always worthwhile. And that's in the production world, right? So that's something that's really easy to say. We can understand mise en place when we're saying, hey, I want to be able to put my hands on a trimmer when I need one, and I know right where it is. I want my stabilizer that's the most used to be right next to uh, my station so I can just, rock and roll. I understand that pretty well. Art preparation, it's a little less, right? That's something where you might not think about it. Whereas material placement, understanding what production is going on, or even extending this out, pre-preparing your production queue. We would frequently, to keep production moving, have a production queue of jobs by every machine where we literally physically lined them up in the order of production with the materials they needed on top of each box, so that when the person doing production was doing production, they were in the mode, in the mood, doing that work. Once they finish with one job and they counted themselves out, the next job is prepped. They are moving into production mode. They do not have to stop and search and run around. And it's better sometimes to stop and do that work even before your production day for all the jobs you think you're going to work on, or at least the first few that get you through your first part of your shift. And that's something that's just great for efficiency, but it's also good for avoiding errors. Knowing that you have everything in line before you start and then making that final check is where you can catch gross errors or things that are just flat missing. So I think it's really worthwhile in general. So it just depends, right? It depends on what you're doing, and it depends on how that works for you. So yeah, like I said, lots of people have different ways to handle this, and we're going to talk about the file portion of it in a minute. In fact, Debbie says, "I watched the sew simulator to figure it all out." Absolutely, watch the simulation. The sew simulation is always worthwhile, and you know, off the side here, but Heidi says, "I use glue stick for appliques. Then they dry clear and wash out less messy than spray tack." Yeah, they can be for sure. Most of the applique stuff I did. Used a little bit of spray tack usually if I needed it, but a lot of the stuff I did was actually pressure sensitive. When I was doing standard twill, we used pressure sensitive poly twill. It was like a sticker, pre-cuts, so it was really easy. I did the cuts certainly myself with a regular plotter, but pressure sensitive is very similar. Doesn't have any of that problem. But I would say, yeah, any method that works for you works. It's always good. Uh, B says, I run my business in a caravan while traveling in Australia. I still need to get things together. You know what? I think that's totally fair. And a caravan, or a trailer, or a RV, for those of you who are not from somewhere across the pond. Yeah, doing mobile embroidery, even if you're at a single machine, what I'm going to tell you is, despite the fact that you might be at a single machine doing things yourself, even if you digitize it yourself and you feel like you know everything, the breath you take before you push the button to stop and check, like I said, it can really save you, because you will notice that you've done something stupid. This is the time where you realize that you didn't switch your machine off of rotation because you were doing caps last. This is the time where you notice that your hoop is not positioned the way you thought it was supposed to be. This is the time where, oh, by the way, tracing the hoop before you start, and or placing a paper copy. This is the way we used to do it. Cut a paper copy that's printed out at scale, set that sucker inside the hoop, and set your origin point on the printed origin point, and you know where the extents of the design are. If you aren't going to trace, that's a fine enough way to do it. The old paper copy works. But tracing your hoop, making sure that works. If you're on a home style, or if you're on a machine that is either home style, or you're talking about kind of a prosumer machine, most of them are aware of hoop sizes and will let you know that stuff. But part of that preparation and that pre-flight check can also be checking, tracing your design or what have you in production. But like I said, though I'm going to talk about this in the realm of digitizing and file preparation in a moment here, there is something to that beat that you wait, the breath that you take, and the pre-flight checklist. So very much like we had that comment from Greg Kitson earlier, it really is that the way to kind of protect that CPR. So I'll just kind of hit that one more time, because I think it's a really great way to put it. If we're trying to get consistency, predictability, and repeatability, well, part of that is, like I said, doing things consistently in order every time. It is a lot easier to do that if part of your process is to prepare your materials first and check them over. Predictability, certainly. I think it's enhanced by doing this work, because even if we're talking about kind of the material set of the mise en place of your embroidery area, it is much more predictable if you do know, even when things go off the rails, where your tools are, where your materials are, where your, like I said, your trimmers, your scissors, your stabilizers, everything else you need. Even when things go off the rails, if you don't have to go looking for a tool, let's say you've dropped the bob in case it's out of round, if you know where your spare parts are, if you have that stuff in a place where it is reliably going to be, then you're going to be able to kind of have a predictable time in your shop as well as predictability of outcome. And that's something that it comes more from, like I said, talking about the digitizing embroidery side of it. And then repeatability, making sure you can do things the same way every time. Well, if part of this process is having your materials in place, knowing that you've got your hoop set up and your hoop station is set up in the same way every time, then things like positioning of the design on the apparel, things like that, are going to be repeatable, let alone just knowing that you're going to have the same kind of production process whenever you go to it. And by the way, we also have another comment. I'd like to say hi to everybody. Jeff from Embroidery Nerds. So Jeff Fuller's here saying, hello. So Fuller Embroidery Works and Embroidery Nerd. So yeah, check that. Go check them out. And like I said, they've got that book from Bonnie Nielsen. So yeah, consistency, predictability, and repeatability are super enhanced by thinking of certainly mise en place. Now the other thing I've talked about is that this does also kind of bear fruit in the world of digitizing embroidery. Not just the part of production that we do, it is also in the art preparation digitizing. So that also means things like when you're doing art preparation, preparing it the same way every time, making sure that you have all of your approvals in order before you start setting stitches. Doing that reliably also means you don't end up in problems where we've done work that can't be undone. We have to do excessive editing to something that's already digitized, or where we're not getting paid for work because we have people who are unhappy that they didn't know you were making alterations. So art preparation and things like customer approvals also benefit greatly from having everything in a row, knowing where your information is, making sure you've gone through all the steps, and doing that kind of pre-flight checklist before I digitize. Do I need to make these changes? Have I sent those off? Have I gotten back a reply? Do I have the clearance to make alterations that need to be made or not? Have I discussed everything that needs to be discussed with the customer before I go on? Do they know that I'm making changes based on color, garment, structure, etc.? These things are all part of that art preparation, and that is still part of that preparation and the pre-flight. Before you start digitizing, do your approval pre-flight. Before you send your file out, then we also want to do the pre-flight for your embroidery file. So I'm going to talk about that really quickly. This is something that I've talked about in many of my classes, so it's not new to anybody who's been around me for a while, but I will just kind of bring this up. And in fact, I'll show you a slide or two from one of my many slide decks about this whole concept. And that's really about what I call reviewing the preview. We've talked about this already, that we should use our software's replay tool for things. I've gone ahead and made a little example of a very simple thing that you can do that turns out incorrectly. So a couple different errors that happen if you're not paying attention while you're digitizing. Things that are very easy to miss if you're not careful, that can have a deleterious effect to your eventual stitch out or your runtime, your efficiency. So let's briefly kind of go over that. First thing, just saying, hey, what is this reviewing the preview? This is just something I really recommend everybody do with any file they've created or any file that comes into your shop. So if you're having this done by another digitizer, whatever is the case, I highly recommend that you use your software's replay tool to evaluate designs before they're running. So bring your eventual stitch file. So this is also another thing, and I'm going to talk about this again. If you are digitizing for yourself before you go to the machine to do your stitch out, open up the resulting stitch file. When you export a stitch file, reopen the stitch file in your software and do this replay. Certainly you can do it in your digitizing software and you'll see these problems, but the best opportunity, and I'm going to show you this on a digitized file, not on a stitch file, but the best opportunity to know exactly what's going on is always going to be on the final stitch file before you send it. Because like I've said, there are filters in place in most software that will do things like, and I'll go ahead and get off the slide for a second. They will remove the smallest stitches according to a number that you set. Potentially, they will break up large stitches or turn them into jump stitches, depending on a number you set, or machine limitations. That can also happen on a machine, depending on the kind of machine you're running. You can have these things happen that are visible in the stitch file that are not visible in the digitized file. The digitized file may allow you to do things that your output file does not, and the output file has all of the filters for things like uh, trim configurations, for smallest, largest stitch, things like that. Those filters are in place and generally happen right at the point of export. They may or may not be pre-visualized in your digitizing portion of your software. So you do want to reopen that stitch file when you go do your preview. But other than that, right? Other than that, we just want to make sure we review the preview. We use the software's replay tool so we can evaluate those designs before running. You want to watch for the following things, right? Unnecessary movement. Is it jumping around in places that it shouldn't be? Poor layering. Did something accidentally get into the wrong sequence? Or maybe in the process of previewing, did you drag something out of sequence? Anything that looks off, and keep notes if you need to. And honestly, this is for gross errors. You can scrub back and forth over a potential problem area to identify issues in sequencing. And particularly, is the one that I always talk about, but it's one for digitizers that happens all the time: copy and paste errors in text. And I know this is an old saw for a lot of you, but because I keep saying people talk about it, these are things that I bring up again. Yes, I know lots of you are like, I've heard this speech before, Eric. Well, the truth of the matter is, though you may have heard the speech before, I continually hear people talking about things they could have avoided because they don't do this process of reviewing the preview. Um, Generally, I do very much recommend you look at that stitch file. And I know there are things like, let's say you're using old school DST, it won't output the colors, so the colors aren't correct and it's harder to view sometimes. I got you. But when we're going for the stitch file, we are not necessarily looking at colors aside from color sequencing. And we should probably know those already by the time we're to the point of the preview. We should know in general where colors go. And we're looking for things like bad sequencing or jumps or errors that are there in copy and paste. And especially with digitizers, you guys know the best way to do things quickly is to steal from yourself. If you're doing custom text and there are multiple instances of the letter E, it's really highly likely that any digitizer with a brain who's using the same font, and it's a regularized font where the E doesn't vary, is going to copy that letter in whole and dump it somewhere else in the file when needed. And the problem being that it's really frequent that people will accidentally paste in place right on top of the original E and miss an extra copy of it. And then it runs twice and you get a fat, thick letter that causes the needle to bind up and it looks stupid. And you don't know that that's happening. Well, it happens a lot. And the thing is, though I talk about it with lettering, I have also seen this in designs that have repeated motifs, even in people just deciding like, hey, here's a very similar shape to another shape that I just made. I'm going to copy and paste it, but they accidentally paste two copies in the original position. And because in digital previews, stitches that are exactly right on top of each other can't look like they're rolling over or thick, they just lay exactly on top of each other, unless you are very cognizant of your stitch count or you're doing replays or checking your object list. It's really easy to miss the fact that you've pasted something right on top of the original copy. So let's just kind of go over something in software. I have a design that I made. It's a kind of a raven mount. It's a, Viking Age or thereabouts piece of hardware. So archaeological finds, you guys know I like to do that kind of design work. So this raven mount, I have attributed it to my kind of fake clothing brand. I actually did at one time run a brand called Weird Stitches that I made some garments and stuff out of and sold. But Weird being my fake clothing brand. Let's say that I've decided to make this logo that has the Weird logo text underneath the raven shield mount that we have here. So in looking at this, I can say, all right, I see some weird stuff already. Haha. No pun intended. But the first thing is I can see that the colors, and this is opening this up in the original stitch file. Maybe this is or the original working file. Colors look a little strange because I thought the two colors are supposed to be the same between the text and the border. Maybe that's something you notice in a working file. The truth of the matter is in a stitch file, you may not notice that anyway because the colors might be assigned differently. But no big deal. I can see that the sequencing is kind of what I expect it to be in general. But as I start to look at this piece, I turn off our true view and say, all right, first thing to notice, if you have your jumps turned on, you may not even have to do the preview to notice I've got a jump that doesn't belong here. I've got one that I know does because I've got an element that can't connect to anything else. But here, this red dotted line that's appearing up here, I can already see that there is a jump here where something has not been sequenced correctly with the entry and exit points. So before I even start the preview, I know something's strange. Other than that, though, I'm looking down here and I'm not necessarily seeing something, but wait, nested in there, I might notice Oh, there's another jump that doesn't belong here in the lettering. But let's just indulge ourselves and say, I didn't notice when I first opened this up. And look how easy it is not to notice, even with our stitches not on preview. If, especially if I go 1-to-1 on the sizing, or I'm right here, I'm not seeing anything going on. This looks normal. These letters look fine. Stitch counts within a reasonable range of what I would expect for that pocket. Okay, cool. Not a big deal. It's a left chest design where, it's 10,000, but that's fine. We're looking all right as far as we're considering for this piece. But if I zoom in on this piece, maybe I notice that fine. Let's say, all right, maybe I still don't notice that little red dotted line in here. Well, let's review the preview. And in this case, we're going to use the Stitch Simulator. I'm working in Brilliance, of course, on this piece. This was digitized in Brilliance. But as I start scrubbing through the design, I'm like, all right, I can look at the sequence. I can say, all right, is it sequenced in a way that I expect it to be? Yeah, it's working pretty well. It's kind of centered out decently. Underlay's fine. It's nothing crazy. I can see it's got a good inset. We've got our travel stitches in place, so we're not jumping around a lot. But as I work through the piece, I start to see, I can see the sequence. I can see how it's put together. I can see if all the underlay is in place the way I expect it to be. And so far, so good, right? Running through it, most of this silver gray is doing great. So we're doing fine, right? But as we get toward the end, we get over here and I notice, hey, I've got a jump. This thing is jumping out to somewhere else. This jumps from here to here. And that doesn't make a ton of sense. We're having this weird jumping that's happening where if we look at this piece again, we can see with those jumps turned on that we've got a sequencing issue. And what we actually have is that this piece right here, we've got our beginning and our ending set incorrectly in the piece. So if we look at, I jumped out of there again. We can see here, we select the piece and we notice that line that we had. You saw how it jumped over from one side to the other really quickly. And I noticed that stitch just didn't have any sort of travel. Well, when I select this object, I can tell from the entry and exit points, they're in the same spot. And I'm like, that is not how that's supposed to be. Well, where is that last element? Now, if this was in the stitch file, you couldn't select the element, but I wanted to be able to correct it for you guys live. I can look at this piece and say, okay, the exit point, that red exit point is over here. Well, these are overlapped. They're touching. Why am I not traveling correctly? It's because on this piece, the entry point wasn't moved into the proper position. In this case, I grab my entry point and I want to bring it over here near to the exit point of the last piece. And then that jump stitch disappears. And now I no longer have that big jump. And you can see that the red dotted line disappears for me. I might not have noticed that without the replay. And then even if the design looked good and didn't stitch improperly, I would be constantly waiting for this really long jump stitch in that design. I don't think you'd go through too many runs before you noticed it, but the time's already lost. Now, that's a pretty simple thing. The one that happens all the time, honestly, outside of that, is what we're going to see here in the lettering. And so I'll zoom in on it. It is very easy to notice when this happens. This is the classic copy and paste error. We go into this design, and as we're going in, we notice, hey, so the way that this was done, these two are the same shape. So I copied that first shape and I pasted it in second position. But then what did I do? Oh, it's actually, I accidentally moved both copies. And so it's running over that same area twice because I was going to use that copy for another piece. Usually it would be that the copy is in the first position again on top of the other piece. But let's just imagine I moved both pieces of that W, that first hook that creates the W, and it's stitching over that second piece twice. So we're seeing that it jumps from that end back up to the beginning again. And then we end up with the second run. So because it's not running again, we see that those design elements are running on top of each other. We can do this in our 3D preview here on Brilliance as well. It runs over the piece and then it does it again before it moves off to the second piece. As we see that needle point icon, the penetration point icon kind of move back over that same area twice, we know that something's wrong here. And if we go to look at the actual file element in here, we can go and see, all right, yep, I've got one copy and then a second copy, and they're both here on top of each other. I need to delete that second copy. And then we can also see that I've got now the entry and exit points aren't correct. So I'll have to go back in and edit those because we can see that the second copy didn't have the entry and exit points moved in the correct fashion. So I need to move my entry point to close to the exit point of the previous piece. And then I need to move my exit point out to where I want that shape to finish and where the next element's entry points are lined up. Now you can see that I no longer have the second copy. And if I go to replay that piece again, I'm going to find that we transition smoothly from element to element and we're back out to the rest of the text. So that's just the super simple stuff that happens when we output files that we want to check on. And certainly there can be other things that happen that are outside of this, with filtering, with short stitches, with long stitches, things of that nature. But I find that the one that bites us the most when we're digitizing tends to be these copy and paste errors. I mean, that really is kind of the most of what happens for folks. Generally, it's something that's not, a massive deal for folks to worry about. They usually understand what's happening, but it can be the case that folks will miss those things, and you end up running, especially, like I said, the doubled letter is so common. It's something that happens all the time. The big thick letter, the thick element, the column that runs twice. Let's say we have a row of identical columns that are part of some, radiating design. People often copy and turn those and use these repeated motifs like pieces in a design because they're not trying to draw those things over and over and over again if they're identical. So that can happen in any portion of the design. Lettering is super common, but it can and does happen all over the place for different types of elements as well. So like I said, just it's a thing that is worthwhile to think about, to know, to understand that you may have something of that nature come up. So like I said, not something that's going to be done all the time. Hopefully you're not going to see that too often in your own work, but it can happen and it can cause problems. And I think that's why it's worthwhile to kind of understand that is a potential issue for your design work, or what have you. Like I said, it's a good idea to review the preview, to go through this work and to make it make sense. And honestly, part of that really is more about the digitizing side of it. The other part of it is making sure that you do things correctly when we're talking about just handling files and looking at those other points of stitch filtering and long stitch filtering. Like I said, preparation, making sure things are right, doing that final pre-flight check. And I think that's the thing is the stitch out pre-flight check. It really is the last chance you have to change things before they get on the machine. But I am going to make absolutely clear, like I say all the time when I point to the wall of shame, wall of fame that's from my old shop, the photo that I use behind me all the time for this show. Uh, we used to also stitch out every design once on either on a single head machine or on the first head of the machine that we were running on. Yes, it seems like a lot to do, but you don't want to either run a stitch intensive design incorrectly, and then even if you're running a few pieces, or run a design that has an error in it or something that is grossly incorrect, a color misplacement, a sequence error, or something that is totally incorrect about the design on 12 shirts before you figure this out on 12 garments, because it's a massive waste. So we always did stitch everything out. So the very last stage of this, even beyond all of this other preparation we have, is to make sure that you're doing a stitch out on material that's appropriate to the final garment, with the right color contrast, when and if at all possible. So I think that's the thing. The pre-flight check is really important. And I also can't stress enough that you really should be opening the stitch file. There are things that can happen that are also difficult with that can make issues with your final piece that you might not expect to happen. And that's just something that you have to really, the only thing you can do is preview the final file to make sure that this is not a problem for you. So like I said, it's just something that you should do. It's worthwhile to do. It's worthwhile to take a moment and check out. And it depends on your software. Like I said, understand what those filtering principles are and how they work. And that's going to be the best chance that you have to make sure you're getting what you expect to get. And I think that's really something people aren't thinking about nearly often enough. So, it's it's worthwhile to think about it. And I think in the case of understanding that kind of consistency, the predictability that we talked about, the repeatability, part of that is just maintaining a process and continuously using that process whenever we start looking at any kind of part of this, any subset of what this is for us. So like I said, it is just something we have to kind of keep in mind, to keep kind of close to us. We should always be thinking this way ahead of time. We should be thinking about this kind of process anyway. In any case, so like I said, I would say most of the time that when I'm talking to folks who are out there who are having trouble with this stuff, it is more about just becoming complacent. Most of us are doing well at this most of the time. Honestly, it is unfortunately frequent that the people who are doing this stuff aren't just the newbies. You think that it's going to be the newbies who are stitching garments to each other, that are opening the wrong files, that are not selecting the right colors. It is actually folks who are in the process, who are working on stuff, who are getting complacent because they do this all the time and they kind of know what to expect. And in that process, they really do kind of end up sabotaging themselves because of it. They end up not thinking about these things, not running through processes, not going through checklists. Or you get comfortable in the kind of customer service part of this and you say, hey, I know this person. They're always good about everything. I'm not going to worry too much about making sure that they have their approvals in order because I know they're good for it. I know they know what they want. I'm not going to get concerned about it either way. And when they do that, it can be really problematic. So, it just depends on what they're doing. It depends on what they're working with. It can become problematic depending on how that works for people. So you really do have to kind of think about that. And it is something that we all deal with. And I don't know that it's something that necessarily goes away with time. We always have to revisit this. And I also do want to recommend again that you think about that mise en place. Even when you're digitizing, say, hey, have all the stuff that's around you that you need, have your color charts close at hand, have the original art ready for you so you can look at it. Make sure that you set up your software the same way, that you calibrate your monitor to the actual size of a ruler. You go ahead and calibrate it to actual size. So you say, I go to one-to-one zoom, that one-to-one zoom is always going to produce for you what you expect. And if you can do that, then you constantly work from the same kind of boundaries. You understand that your scale is always going to be the same. You understand that everything's going to look the way you expect it to look. And I think that's part of that mise en place too, is saying, prepare your monitor, make sure the brightness is the way you expect it to be, make sure everything's set up the way you want it, have everything at hand, have your art at hand, and have everything calibrated so you know exactly what the scale is going to be. Use the same scale units for your grid outlay that you would at any other time, so that from software to software, from file to file, you're always working on the same scale, and that you have an understanding of the reality and the physical reality of your embroidery as you do it. And then, like I said, ultimately, once you're done with that in the digitizing world, the preparation pre-flight really is about doing that stitch out pre-flight check, is about opening the final stitch file. I'm going to make one more case about that too, and making sure that you review the preview. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of tell on something that we have happened to us sometimes in Brilliance, where reviewing the preview is really important. Now, this is something that's very easy to turn off, to change, to fix. But one of the common things we have is that people are used to using some of the automations that we have in order to help them. When they bring in two digitized files and say essentials, and these are pre-digitized files, we do have the ability to eliminate any covered stitch. Pardon me. When we have two files put together, we can throw two files together. And when we output the DST file, the PES file, whatever they use, we can eliminate what is underneath. We can cut that out in an automated fashion. And that's something that's done for people who are composing finished embroidery files. The problem being that sometimes people will do things where they accidentally place an object in front of stitches that they don't know is going to eliminate them, because we also have the ability to eliminate things like appliques or material. We can eliminate the stitches that are behind an applique slab in the software as well. So one of the things we sometimes have problems with is people will do something like add an applique element, or in this case, I've added a patch element. The thing is, if you look at my sequencing here, I have a design, a pre-made version of that weird text that I've done before, and we drop a patch element on top of it. And we see in the sequence, the patch edge runs last. However, because of how this is done, they've decided, this person, let's say I have decided to leave on all of the other elements where my position is there as well. So my cut lines, my position lines, my tack down lines are all in this same object, meaning that I also have my fabric there. And because I have turned off the preview of my fabric, when I'm looking at this, I'm going to expect that my design comes out like I see it here, that it's going to run the text on the fabric, and then it's going to run all these position lines and everything else. However, the software is understanding this as an applique, is understanding this as fabric. And in fact, if I would go to turn on my fabric preview, I would realize that the text is underneath the fabric. And if you have turned on in your system that handy dandy automated feature that cuts away elements that are behind appliques or fabric in your composition, what ends up happening if I open up the DST file that I output from this particular set of sequences, what I'm going to get is this. It has a couple of position stitches that are from the original portion of the color changes, but it has wiped out the text in the middle. Why? Because it expects that in the process at the last moment, you can see that we actually have placement stitches and stitches that are supposed to hold down fabric. It's expecting that I'm placing a piece of fabric on top of the area where the text is. So there's different options for how you can handle this. You can change your sequencing. What I often like to do with my patches is actually separate them out, where I can go ahead and turn off a portion of this. I'm going to turn off everything but my top stitch, so the position stitch is not here, and I'm going to throw that patch and actually have two copies of this patch object with the text in between. We can certainly do that, but I'm going to be honest with you and tell you that because I don't do a lot of compositing designs, I don't compose multiple designs that I need to knock a chunk out of almost ever. I'm not going to do that. I don't use a lot of stock design elements, and I'm not generally going to use automated methods to pop out a chunk of design. It's a really awesome way to handle stock designs when you want to compose them in a way that's smart and doesn't have all that excess density. But as a digitizer, I'm not going to use that. So for me, I'm usually going to go into my preferences and go into jumps and overlaps, and I'm just going to turn that off. I'm going to say, hey, you know what? Either I'm going to say I don't want applique objects to ever treat as filled, or truthfully, I'm going to turn that off because almost invariably, I don't want that on by default because I know that I'm not going to automatically knock out a chunk of stitches. I don't put stitches where I don't want stitches as somebody who digitizes. So that's just something that can happen. And also we can see in utilities, you can also have other elements in those preferences where we can have things in conversions that can change things. Like if we are in our DST format here, specifically in Brilliance, we have the ability, if we want to change long jump stitches into trims automatically. I currently have that turned off, but you have it turned on. You might have to check stitch points so you know that it's at the length that you want it to be, so you don't accidentally turn jump stitches that are just long stitches, because that's all these stitches are. It's for filtering out accidental long jumps between objects, where you have a design file that you want to clear out stitches that should have been triggered as a trim for software, but are not being triggered as a trim. In that case, you might want to put that ensure trims after a certain length. I'm probably going to go ahead and put this, at a very high number. But truthfully, for me, once again, because I do control these things, I'm going to turn that function off. There's also adjustments where you might want to open up a file. And after you open that file up, you might say, I want my minimum stitch length to be this. I want my maximum stitch length to be this. And after that stitch length, I want you to break up excessively long stitches because they're going to either run slower or be filtered out by my machine. These are all things you can do, and you may want to turn those off or on depending on what you're doing. And this is really for people who are using stitch files that are from stock. So these are stock stitch files, not for digitizers. This is not a digitizing function. It's really for filtering files that are pre-digitized. So for me, I turn a lot of that stuff off. I'm not going to remove hidden stitches because I'm not trying to remove those overlapped things, because I'm going to digitize out any of that stuff. I'm not going to rely on an automated setting to do that. Is that a negative thing? Absolutely not. When you want that, when you want to overlap two stock designs, or when you are doing, let's say, the classic one, which is a like one of those classic kiddo applique shirts where it's got a fire truck and the number 3, and the number 3 is applicated, but the fire truck's peeking out from the back. If you're using a complete stock design, you want to cut the back end off of that stock design without selecting a bunch of stitches and trying to repath them, using the automated removal of those overlap stitches is super handy, especially for onesie twosie work like that might be individually done for someone where another number might be used over that same stock design. It is fantastic for customizers, but it's not really something that digitizer would use. But if I were looking back at that original file, and I'll bring it up on screen one more time, I might not know, if I'm not savvy to how my software works and the fact that filtering can happen, that processes happen on saving the stitch file, that this would have happened to my design. So, like I said, we're going to go ahead and kind of leave it at that, folks. I'm going to go ahead and say that makes enough sense for everybody. I think it's a worthwhile thing to think about. We do want to prepare ourselves for our job. So let's go back to that little bit from Greg Kitson. Why do we want to do this stuff? Why do we want to do preparation pre-flight? So why do we want to prepare our areas, and why do we want to do pre-flight? So that we get CPR, consistency, predictability, and repeatability. Well, one of the ways we can do that is to arrange our area and kind of ourselves. In that area can be our digitizing software and our desktop as much as it can be the area around our machine, to make sure that everything is in its place. We can do our art preparation correctly, make sure we have everything in line and have our art in a format that makes sense for our digitizing and that it is approved by a customer if we are in the commercial sphere. We can make sure that, like I said, our materials are where they intend to be. Our production queue is set up in the order it should be, and everything is selected, found, and ready to run before we start our day in production. When we're working with our files and doing file preparation, we can review the preview, scrub through the sequence of the design to make sure there are no gross errors in sequencing, copies, and pastes. And we can also do that stitch out pre-flight check and make sure that everything is where it should be, that we have everything we need to run the design, and that everyone who needs to sign off has signed off. With that, folks, I think I'm going to call it a day, because I do have something else I have to do today. And I'm actually going to share something that's kind of a sad news thing. In fact, it's a very sad news thing, but it's something that I have to go do today, which is why I'm cutting the show short today. Um, you may know that my wife and I are great lovers of cats. She's somebody who owned cats since she was a kiddo, and I never did, but she kind of brought cats into my life, and we have a lot of cats ourselves. However, for the past while I was living in this house here, we had a community kind of outdoor cat who very obviously was left by a previous owner. He unfortunately couldn't mix back into a group of cats indoors anymore. He had really gotten used to that outdoor life, but somebody had left him behind, and he often came to our yard, and he had a ragged collar when we first saw him. But one day we got that off of him because it was twisted around into his fur, and we often took care of this guy, and this guy's named Chester. Unfortunately, which was kind of the worst thing ever. Right in this time when, you guys may know if you watched the last episode, I'm trying to pack up and get ready to move. Chester came back to us after a long absence, having been attacked by a coyote. And that's something I don't want to talk about in any other length. But poor Chester was injured, and he came back to us. We had fed him and taken care of him many times and cleaned him up, and we had tried to kind of integrate him and help him be around us a little bit more, because he was all over the neighborhood, and poor Chester had been hurt. And so we took care of Chester, but time came that we couldn't take care of Chester anymore. And very recently we had to take Chester after we tried to do what we could to help him. He could not be helped. But this is Chester, and today I have to go and pick up Chester. We decided that the last thing we would do for our friend Chester is to have him cremated and bring him home with us, so that he can be with our cats and be home with us from here on out. Now, I know I'm a big softie, and you guys know me that way. I will try not to make too much of it, but this was very hard on us and our little family, and we're going to miss Chester a lot. Makes it a little easier to leave this house for sure, because we didn't know how we were going to get him to come with us or be part of the household, but he had been missing off and on lately a lot, and we tried to take care of him, but he wouldn't really be trapped or taken care of, and he wouldn't stay in a house for any period of time. But we took care of him as best we could, and we gave him a home when we could, and we made sure he was fed and healthy, and took care of him. But he had been already up in age, already had some problems. He had a paralyzed leg from the first time we ever saw him, and he just lost his last fight. But we're going to go pick up Chester now, so I got to get going. What I want to say is, the only reason I kind of share that with you guys is not only just to tell you where I'm headed and why I might be a little bit in a weird mood today, but what I'm going to say is just take some time today to think about the things that are important to you, and to make memories with the people you care about, with the animals you care about, in the places you are, in the home you're living in the state you're from, with the people you love. Make some memories. Let yourself go when things go wrong once in a while. Do what you can, but take some time to take a breath, to notice what's around you, to enjoy the process of embroidery, to use it to speak the truth that's in your heart, to help other people say the words that they need to say, and to commemorate the things that they belong to and believe in, even if you're in the commercial sphere. And also, take some time for those who are uh, having a hard time out there, and make sure they're taken care of too. But suffice it to say, we're glad we're going to bring our boy home. With that, I hope you have a good weekend. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and I can't wait to see you again next week.